When you hear the name Dwight D. Eisenhower, there's probably one image that pops into your head, right? Ike, the friendly but tough-as-nails five-star general, the mastermind behind D-Day, the hero who led the Allies to victory in World War II. His name is just synonymous with that war.
Now really, think about it. If someone asked you to name his biggest achievements, you'd probably list all military stuff. Supreme Allied commander, winning the war in Europe, you know the drill. It's a legacy that was forged on the battlefield. But what if I told you that's really only half the story, and maybe not even the most interesting half?
Okay, let's just let this sink in for a second. That's a quote from a letter Ike wrote back in 1954. Now, does that sound like a hardline conservative Republican president to you? It's an all-out defense of a massive government social program. And this one quote, well, it cracks open the door to the real Dwight D. Eisenhower, a president who is way more complex and, frankly, a lot more progressive than his military legend would have you believe.
To really understand Ike's presidency, you've got to look past the uniform and see the guy who had to govern a very prosperous but also a very anxious America, right at the height of the Cold War. And his philosophy, it was anything but simple.
He actually had a couple of names for it himself. He'd call it dynamic conservatism or progressive conservatism. His goal was what he called the middle way. So what on earth does that mean? Well, think of it like this. He was conservative with money. He definitely wanted to balance the budget. But when it came to people, he was surprisingly liberal. He really believed the government had a key role to play in taking care of its citizens.
And this slide right here is all the proof you need. Just look at this list. Instead of tearing down FDR's New Deal, Ike kept all the major programs going. He didn't just save Social Security, he blew it up, adding another 10 million people to it. He created a whole new cabinet department for health, education, and welfare, a massive expansion of the federal government's job. And he finished the work of desegregating the entire military. These are just not the moves of a typical by-the-book conservative.
And he didn't stop at social programs. Eisenhower physically changed the face of the country with two of the biggest, most ambitious projects in American history. I mean, projects we still feel the impact of every single day.
Let's just wrap our heads around this number. 41,000 miles of highway. That's enough road to circle the entire planet almost twice. It is still, to this day, the biggest public works project America has ever done. And it did so much more than connect cities. It totally changed how Americans live, fueling the rise of the suburbs, our whole car culture, everything.
And the idea came straight from his own life. See, as a young Army major way back in 1919, he was part of a military convoy that took 2 agonizing months to cross the U.S. because the roads were so terrible. Then, years later in Germany, he saw Hitler's Autobahn and realized what a strategic game-changer it was. So how'd he sell it to Congress? He pitched it as a matter of national defense, a way we could evacuate cities and move troops in a hurry if the Soviets ever attacked.
Then, in 1957, the world got a wake-up call. A little beeping sphere called Sputnik was suddenly orbiting the Earth, launched by the Soviet Union. America was panicked, thinking we were falling behind. Ike's response was incredibly fast and decisive. Within a year, he created NASA to run the civilian side of the space race, and just as important, he signed the National Defense Education Act, pouring a ton of federal cash into science and tech education to make sure America had the brainpower to win the future.
Now let's switch over to foreign policy. You'd think a five-star general would be all about building a massive army, right? Well, prepare to be surprised again. Ike's plan for fighting the Cold War was a fascinating mix of, well, brute force and shadowy secrets. He called it the New Luck policy. The idea was that keeping huge, expensive armies stationed all over the globe just wasn't sustainable. So in a move that seems kind of weird for a general, he actually shrank the U.S. Army. His big idea was to rely on the threat of massive retaliation with America's nuclear arsenal to keep the Soviets in check. It was a strategy of more bang for the buck, cheaper for sure, but a whole lot riskier.
And this led to this really interesting 2-track foreign policy. You can see it laid out here. Publicly, the administration would talk about diplomacy and negotiations. But behind the curtain, the CIA was busier than it had ever been. As you can see in Iran in '53 and then Guatemala in '54, the U.S. secretly backed coups to get rid of leaders it didn't like. But then, during the Suez Crisis in '56, he did the complete opposite. He used America's economic muscle to force our own allies, Britain, France, and Israel, to back down from their invasion of Egypt. It was a high-stakes game of global chess.
And Ike was absolutely not afraid to play his ultimate card.
He had promised voters he'd end the bloody Korean War, so once he was in office, he basically sent a private message to the Chinese and North Koreans letting them know he was seriously thinking about using nuclear weapons if they didn't agree to a ceasefire. Was he bluffing? We'll never know for sure. But you know what? It worked. A deal was signed and the fighting stopped.
But there is no part of Eisenhower's legacy that's more complicated or more filled with contradictions than his record on civil rights. He was, in many ways, a man of his time, and his actions show someone who was really conflicted on the issue.
This right here is his most famous civil rights moment. The governor of Arkansas literally used the National Guard to stop 9 black students from integrating a high school, which was a direct defiance of a federal court order. Ike saw this as a challenge to the rule of law. So what did he do? He sent in the 101st Airborne Division, an elite fighting force, to personally escort those students to class. It was an incredibly powerful image of federal authority being used to protect civil rights.
And he also had some wins in Congress. He signed 2 civil rights acts into law. Now, they weren't nearly as strong as the laws that would come later, but they were the first of their kind in almost a century. And they created the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department, which really laid the foundation for all the progress that was still to come.
But, and this is a really big but, there's a much darker side to this story. While he was taking these steps for African Americans, his administration was actively going after another group. His Executive Order 10450 kicked off something that's now known as the Lavender Scare. Basically, a witch hunt for gay and lesbian people working in the federal government. The excuse was that they were security risks. The result was that thousands of people were fired, their careers and their lives completely destroyed. It's a really painful stain on his record.
And all of this brings us to the very end of his presidency. As he was getting ready to leave the White House, Eisenhower, the lifelong soldier, gave one of the most unexpected and honestly prophetic farewell speeches in American history.
I mean, just stop and think about the irony. This is the man who built up the modern American military. He oversaw a massive arms race. He understood military power better than almost anyone alive, and for his final address to the nation, he decides to issue a warning about that very same power.
He's the one who gave us the phrase we all still use today, the military-industrial complex. He warned that this permanent combination of a huge military and a giant arms industry could gain so much influence, economically, politically, even spiritually, that it could actually threaten our democracy. This wasn't some protester saying this. This was General Eisenhower, the guy who knew the system from the inside out was sounding the alarm.
So that's what we're left with, this final, chilling question. The general who became a president of peace, the conservative who built up social programs in modern America, he left us with a warning about the very machine he helped create. And now, more than 60 years later, you have to ask yourself, have we actually listened? Have we heeded his warning?